things that recently has come up. There have been questions about accommodations on district-wide assessments. So I've asked Joe Kramer and John McKenzie to join us today to share some information about appropriate accommodations for district-wide assessments. So that will be our first agenda item this morning. So I'm going to turn it over to Joe and John.
Okay, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. So let's see if this works. I just have a few documents that I want to show. We typically send out something in the fall and definitely in the spring. This year time got away from us and we did not get anything sent out. Just kind of a general notice to administrators to remind folks of standardized administration practices with regards to district-wide assessments as a whole, but specifically Iowa assessments. And we will certainly send that out very shortly. I think probably 3/4 of our schools test in the spring, but we do realize we have folks that continue to test in the fall and winter. So what I have here is just kind of a litmus test that I put together that I share with folks as we're thinking through when accommodation should be provided to individuals. So real quickly, student has a significant need for an accommodation, typically due to a disability or limited English proficiency. And again, typically this need is documented on an IEP, a 504 plan, or EL plan. So it's not just one individual educator's decision, but it's a team decision regarding the needs of the individual. Also, and I think this is getting way better than it had in the past, but that any accommodation that is chosen for a district-wide assessment is also an accommodation that's used just as a matter of good instructional practices in the classroom, day in and day out. Whether it's a common classroom assessment, a quiz, or a full-blown district-wide assessment, these are accommodations that are used for the individual. The accommodation addresses a documented need and is not just something that's nice to have. And there are a lot of nice to have accommodations that kids could have, but then we run into the potential problem of kids who are given changes in administration and scoring, the actual results may not be generalizable to other. Let's see. And also a litmus test is that the accommodation that is offered does not change what that test is intending to offer. And the prime example would be a reading test. Well, it no longer becomes a reading test, it becomes a listening comprehension test. And so one of the changes that had occurred between the old ITBS, ITED, and Iowa assessment is that vocabulary used to be on the reading portion. It used to load on the total reading score, and hence you could not read the reading test nor the vocabulary portion. On the Iowa assessment portion test, which is the revised one as of about 5 years ago, vocabulary is no longer on the reading total and can be read because it's wanting to measure understanding of the English language. Vocabulary, not necessarily the ability to read a word and understand what that word means. So but with the current Iowa assessment, it is still not appropriate to read the reading test. And if documented on an IEP 504 EL plan, if a student needs math test read, or science and social studies, or other tests, those can certainly be read aloud to the student. Let's see what else we have. So those are the big pieces. And then lastly, I want to pull up some excerpts from the actual administration documents, the Iowa administration documents. And these should be documents that are in the hands of all teachers or educators who are facilitating the administration of an assessment. And so this is from level 9 through 14. And if you know, level 9 is 3rd grade through high school. and levels 5 through 8 would be for kindergarten through 2nd grade. And so I'm going to, whoops, it's not, I'm going to have to stop sharing and then share again. Here we go. There we go. So this is an excerpt from the Iowa Assessment's Directions for Administration, and you'll see there are time limits specifically noted. The time limits is another element, another that is sometimes confused in terms of providing accommodations. Again, we have a lot of learners because of their need to use other devices or things, or their disability creates slower processing, needing to take more breaks, etc. Extended time is a very appropriate accommodation to be used for students. Students who do not have those types of accommodations specifically noted in an IEP have a significant need. These are the time limits that must be adhered to. This assessment was standardized based upon kids having this amount of time to complete the task.
Yeah, Joe, can you clarify one thing, that for students that have it documented in their IEP for extended time, it's appropriate?
Yes.
For students that do not have an IEP or a 504 plan, it's not appropriate to extend the time. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. I mean,
okay.
the testing manual says that typically kids that would get any of these accommodations, it is noted in a 504 plan, an IEP, or an EL plan.
Okay.
Typically. Now, we could probably all identify kids who may not have a need for a 504 plan, IEP, who may need accommodations. Just be very, very, very careful with those decisions, because it becomes a slippery slope. But I would say 99% of the kids who would need an accommodation, it would be addressed in a 504 EL or IEP. One thing about time limits is that level 5 through 8, which is kindergarten through 2nd grade, there are no time limits. And you can go to that administration manual and it will mention this is about how much time to plan for the completion of this task. There are no defined time limits. For grades 3rd through high school, the time limits that you see in the manual and also on my screen are the time limits that all kids, unless documented, would be held to.
So within that documentation, so if I'm looking at an IEP and I want extended time, do I need to, at one time it used to be, you need to say 2 times, would be 2 times for extended time. Do we still need to indicate that with an IEP, how much time we're saying they need to extend?
Yeah, Iowa testing doesn't speak to that. I think anytime you can be as specific as possible in those documents so that any instructor knows what to expect, what the needs of that individual is. And it should be based upon what you have experienced the kid needing in real situations, and not necessarily just kind of flipping a coin and saying, let's go 2 times, or but it should be based upon observations. But again, it doesn't specifically say you need to be that specific, but I think the more specific it can be, it just helps other educators apply the same types of accommodations. I think there was a question in chat.
Is there a limit on extended time?
Again, the manuals, administration manuals, do not speak to any limits. That's a team decision, a team conversation based upon the needs of that individual. I don't know, just in my experience, I would, having double the amount of time.
At some point in time, this child is going to have enough and be done with the test. And if you know your students, you'll know when that time is.
I'm just going to scroll through this. You can see students with special needs. This is nearly all students would have been identified for special education services, 504 or EL plan. Let's see. Typical accommodations you'll see, again, most frequently provided to students with an IEP 504. You can see the read aloud. Under no circumstances should the reading test be read aloud or signed. Off level, we know, at least in Iowa, with our previous expectations, No Child Left Behind, that an outer level assessment would not be appropriate. Repeated directions, you can read through this. Again, extended time guidance from the student's IEP. So a lot of deference is given to this team of individuals who know this kid. And so that's to the extent specific as possible to be spelled out. And these are just some other typical that I can add into, get into the chat box as a link if people need it, but knowing that we'll be sending this out probably within a week to all administrators so that they have it at the top of their email file and can readily share with staff in their building.
If you'd like to send it to me, I'll make sure it's added to our online agenda.
Okay, I will do that.
Thanks.
So just a quick reminder of accommodations and that it's very important that we adhere to those because that's what the test was built upon. That's what the norms were developed based upon. And the more that we deviate from those standardized procedures, the less we can believe that a student's scores can be compared to what the norms would say. And it becomes a real slippery slope when we start to independently, individually as an educator, start changing those.
And would you say that it really is based on an individual student, that the default is to adhere to the administration and the standard
Yes.
way of administering the test, unless there's a reason why a student might need something different?
And that reason is typically formally documented in a 504, IEP, or EL plan, and that plan was developed by a group of individuals who know that kid.
Any questions or comments?
So we've had a lot of conversation around how accommodations would become available for students with an IEP. This is a special education advisory meeting. So these time limits that I just scrolled through, I think it's in this document, also apply to all general education kids. So if you do not have some sort of a document like we've mentioned that mentions extended time, these are the time limits that need to be held to for all other,
in your sheet.
almost period.
And your plans could change for number 2. Sometimes if
So maybe it may come to the point where when you're reading the technical manual, there may be up to some interpretations, but we just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page here and the standardization of the Iowa assessment is kept on the level that it was intended to be, so the inferences we make from those scores are pretty valid and reliable inferences. I just want to make sure that everybody's clear, under no circumstances should a general ed student be given extended time in any situation. And if there's any situation where people are interpreting the technical manual and it's gray in any way, shape, or form, that you seek a second opinion. Call either Joe or I, or get with your regional administrator and pass that by so you're not making decisions in silos out there in the districts, and we're not incorrectly interpreting situations. So that would be the final point that we'd want to make at this point in time. Anybody have any questions, comments? Okay.
Thank you very much. I do want to make sure everyone knows that we are recording this session, so it will be available and we'll distribute it at when we have time to review it and get it out to everybody.
I have a question. If an accommodation If they don't have the accommodation of chunking of the test, and they have up to 2 times a lot of time, that has to be in one session, correct? So it says 20 minutes for the test, they get up to 2 times, so they get 40, but they don't have a chunking accommodation, they need to do that in one sitting, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think common sense also has to prevail a little bit because the conversation has already occurred for that student to have extended time. There might be time structures within the day that may not be conducive to that. I think common sense, probably best one sitting, because think about a student ramping their brain up to be thinking about a particular content and answering questions, and then all of a sudden removed from that and then be brought back another day perhaps or later in the day. I don't know if it's conducive to best performance for that student necessarily.
But in order to maintain, I guess, to be doing it correctly is my question. You know, should chunking be considered as an accommodation in that instance, just to make sure it's being done correctly?
Again, the more specific an IEP can be to describe what that student needs, the better. But I understand we don't always think of all of those different permeations when we're having those conversations.
And if you're really monitoring that situation across the year, you should know if you're testing the spring or even the fall from the previous year, what that kid needs to best prove how well he knows that content area.
Or even a day in, day out assessment that may take some amount of time. Is that a practice that is followed as a matter of course?
You just have a kid that takes a long time. I don't think he needs chunking, but he has extended time. And if it takes an hour, if that's still a lot of time, he gets 2. You know, you guys, we've got to find that chunk of time for him to be assessed where that's possible. So
I think if you consider twice the time for a lot of kids, in fact, most kids could be twice the pain and suffering that they're dealing with. So maybe certain breaks, whether it's a drink break, get up and move, and then get back at it, but providing that opportunity to just get away from it for even a minute.
And I get that. I understand that. What I'm saying is you guys are here to let us know combinations on standardized assessments. I want your opinion, because if someone says, you know, you gave him 5 water breaks in that 2-hour period, it doesn't say that in his IEP or his 504. You know what I mean? I don't want to be on the hook for doing something that, common sense says, yeah, give them breaks, do that. Gen Ed kids don't get that. You know what I mean? I mean, unless there's a kid's coughing or whatever, hey, go get a drink and come back, kind of a thing. You know, they're not going to get extended time because of that. You know what I mean? I just want to make sure we're doing it right.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you know that this is something that would be a potential need based upon the amount of time the kid needs, yeah, write it into the IEP.
That way it's documented. The kid knows the procedure from test A to test B to test C. It's not something new to him. He kind of knows, he or she knows what's going on. Document it.
I mean, the goal is not that someone will come and, you know, there's not an Iowa assessment standardized administration police force out there that's going, I'm being kind of silly here, but the goal is to collect the best information you can to make the best inferences regarding student growth, student performance. That's the goal. And anytime we start changing things, we lessen the ability that we can believe the data that we're getting. And so that's the big point right there.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I will send you those.
Thank you.
Okay. The next agenda item is 4+ programs. And I will give you a little historical perspective on this. This has been an issue that has been addressed or not addressed over the years. And so for the last couple of years, Kim Drew and Barb Guy at the Department of Ed have worked with community colleges to come up with some guidelines for services for students that need extended services beyond the typical 4 years. And so Rod is going to share the current guidance on 4+ programs with us today.
Heather, can you pull that up on the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, this just came out from the DE 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And even though it's dated that this guidance starts August 2017, August 2017, 4+ programs aren't new. The protocol here isn't really new information. It's just 4+ programs aren't the norm. You know, you don't deal with them every day, and they're just something that when it comes up, there's just generally a lot of questions around it. So if we look at the definition of a 4+ program, you know, generally it's services beyond that traditional senior year, and it's part of, you know, and it's part of the secondary IEP process. And you know, the big thing is when you get into a 4+ program, it's an IEP team decision based on transition needs. And I think that's stated well in that first paragraph of definition of 4+ programs. So it's unmet transition needs. So the IEP team comes to that point in that junior or senior year where there may be some unmet transition needs that need to be addressed by a 4+ program. Now, students don't graduate if the IEP team determines a 4+ program is needed. You know, it's their senior year, they're moving on to a 4+ program, they don't graduate, they don't get assigned diploma, they're held, and the IEP is continued onto that 4+. I think as you look through the guidance, it's important to bring out that 4+ programs are part of the school district's continuum, special ed continuum. Traditionally, as I've dealt with them over the years, it has been programs that community colleges offer, but it also can be done at the school district level. And it may be appropriate to do it at the school district level, depending on what the transition need is. So that's an IEP team decision on where that 4+ program service is provided. And that is, and like I said, I can't reiterate the fact that it is a total IEP team decision when discussing 4+ programs and if there are unmet transition needs, and that needs to happen. Responsibilities of the local educational agency. Like I said, 4+ services are part of a district's secondary program. And, you know, the LEA has the responsibility for making sure the IEP is completed. The IEP team, when discussing 4+ programs, determines the goals that need to be implemented through the 4+ program. You know, most certainly if, you know, it states in this, if a staff member from a contracted agency providing 4+ services is part of the deal, is part of the service that's going to happen, then they should be part of the IEP team decision too. Because it's important, if you're using a community college program for the 4+ program, and if that's determined, and I'm thinking, you know, Iowa Lakes has a program. They're all a little different. Kirkwood has a program, and I've been involved in sending kids there. DMAC has a program, and those are the ones that I've been personally involved with. You have to realize the IEP continues on. There's specially designed instruction that's needed to meet those transition goals. So that 4+ provider, if it's done within the district or if it's done at the community college, they're going to have, you know, a certified special ed instructor doing the special ed instruction, and there has to be progress monitoring as part of that. So the IEP continues, and it's done in that 4+, and it's implemented in that 4+ setting. And that's important to realize that, and the LEA is responsible for that. So what I need to reiterate here is if the student is moving on to Iowa Lakes for that program, I've been involved in some kids going up there, there has to be IEP meetings facilitated through the LEA and the community college program to address that student's needs and to make sure the progress monitoring is being done and then the appropriate data collections being done. And like I said, in this paragraph, responsibilities of the local education agency, students who participate in 4+ services cannot graduate out of the school district in their traditional senior year. They do have the option of participating in the commencement ceremony, but they will not get a signed diploma because they haven't. What you're doing is you're basing the fact that because they have unmet transition needs, they haven't met the requirements to graduate yet. And that will be, and following the, during the IEP process, you will determine when you're going to, you'll meet at the end of probably that year of that, the first year of that 4+ program. And I'll use an example. I've been involved with Iowa Lakes. Student has an unmet living goal because Iowa Lakes, they're kind of unique for their 4+ program that they provide there. They kind of have a 2-tier program there. They have one that kind of does academic development to be able to succeed in a community college type setting in the future. Then they also have a tier program that's actually the student lives on campus as part of a very structured living environment, and they actually get living skills worked on if that's a need in the IEP. But traditionally, when I've been involved in that as an example, we have an IEP meeting sometime during that year that they're at Iowa Lakes to determine how they're making progress on those goals. If they're making that, then we determine the graduation date will be at the end of that year of the 4+ program. But that paragraph really lays it out good as to the responsibility of the LEA in regards to 4+ programs.
So, Rod,
Yes.
the main thing is it's an IEP team
Yes.
decision
Yes.
that the student has additional transition needs. And the services, this is how those needs are going to be met.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it can be a already established program, but it could also be services that the IEP team determines that the district could meet right on their own campus.
You bet. And as an example, Maria, if you've got a kid that hasn't quite developed math skills academically so that they could go on to a community college that they have as a post-secondary expectation, a 4+ program may be appropriate to work in the district to work on those math skills. So there's a lot of variations. The program considerations paragraph lays out that basically, transition services start at age 14, and we'll let you read through that. Going back up, we get a lot of questions about who's responsible for transporting an individual to the location of 4+ services. And when I was in Des Moines meeting on this, of course, a lot of concerns came up with the distance that's required to go to a community college, because the community colleges that have these programs may be far away from the student's resident district. That's why you need to really keep in mind that it may be appropriate to do it in district, because the district is responsible for transporting the individual student to the location of 4+ services. The method of transportation is a district determination rather than parental choice. I think this is important. If the student or parents reject the district's transportation arrangement, transportation becomes the student or parent responsibility. And then the key one is if a student is open enrolled into a district, and that open enrolled district is has the responsibility for the IEP and the possible 4+ service, open enrollment rules follow there, and transportation is the student parent responsibility. As we scan on down here. I think when we look at this, questions always come up. Cost for books, supplies, and other materials necessary to provide FAPE must be covered by the district if a 4+ program is determined by the IEP team to be needed. And so that's important. If the student general supplies are the responsibility of the enrolled students, so that's if student parents decide to purchase the items, if student parents do decide to purchase items that are district's responsibility, and they may, then they become property of the student and parents. I think a key one is if we scan on down, there's a couple for students receiving 4+ services at the community college. Living on campus is a student choice at parental cost, except under 2 conditions. And this is important. Specially designed instruction related to living skills are necessary according to the IEP. And so Iowa Lakes is a good example of that. Then residential costs are necessary to provide that FAPE, because you got to have the living component, then that would be district responsibility. Or if the local district placed the student too far away from home and it's determined by the school district, then and the kid cannot return home daily, then there could be a cost factor with that. If a district requires the student to live on campus, the cost covered will be the cost covered of the dorm and food plan and things like that are the responsibility of the district. But personal living items such as toilet paper, soap, toothbrush, personal items, those are student and parent responsibility.
Now that is a little different, because a lot of times in the past it was the district paid for the educational cost and the parents paid for the residential. So this is clarifying that if the IEP team determines it, then the district is responsible for the residential part.
And that really centers around living skills. If there's living skill needs that need to be there and there's goals written on that, that's part of the, and that's what the 4+ program is about, then that could be the district's responsibility to pay for that dorm charge or living cost.
Rob, maybe you said it, but is this up to a certain age?
Yeah.
21.
21.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
And I think the key is here is that, often I get asked the question, well, are 4+ programs just 1 year beyond the senior year? And they're not. And that's important to realize that. In general, they, ones I've dealt with, mostly they are, but that's why it's important that you have to have an IEP meeting annually to determine if those transition goals have been met. Then you can actually give the signed diploma and the graduation. So in a nutshell, like I said, my recommendation on this, these things often get, they get kind of complicated, and they are, and they're unique. They're not the norm. So for sure, if you're going into a 4+ consideration, involve school administration, the regional administrator, and any other administration support from the AEA you may need as we move through these type of situations. It's the time of year that these tend to come up, and we get some questions about that.
And really, it needs to just be part of the normal conversation with students. And we're trying to get to the point where it doesn't just pop up at the last semester of senior year. That it's been an ongoing discussion, that the district is well aware that the student may need extended services. The parents are aware of it, and then the options have been discussed. In the past, there have been different practices that were at this point in time trying to evolve into just a regular part of the IEP process. And we will be providing training to our staff so that they can also help participate in IEP team meetings, that they clearly understand that this is just a part of the normal process, and that this could be a possibility for any student. But it's not a decision that's made by any one person. So it's the IEP team decision. Do you have other?
No, that's it. Like I said.
What about the contract? Did you want to share about the contract?
Yeah, I can. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, if you're moving on to into a community college placement, it will be you'll have a contract with the community college for that tuition. The community college does not use tuition and billing like a school district does. So you'll have a written agreement with the community college for those costs and how that payment is dispersed to those community colleges. And they all do it a little bit different, but that's part of the process. You will have a contract for payment for cost with the community college. If you're doing it within your own district as a 4+ program, then obviously that's part of your special ed expenditures. The important thing is, and I'm glad Mary brought this up, the kids do stay on head count beyond their traditional senior year as long as they're in a 4+ program. So there's good guidance here. It has Barb Guy and Bill Roeder's name on that. Barb is kind of the general procedure person in regards to 4+ programs. Given her background with transition, this is an area that she's has high expertise in. And then Bill Roeder would be the financial person you would contact in regards to if you have any questions about how contracts are written and so on. I know that there could be, this was presented to all the community colleges and they were invited to come to this. So there may be some community colleges that haven't been in the 4+ business in the past that may be now entering that. And, and there could be questions on how that's managed because they haven't had experience with that before.
Are there questions about this? I will also let you know that Thomas Mays is working on a document about graduation requirements and students with IEPs. And one of the elements of that is that it's really clarifying what decisions the IEP team can make about graduation requirements, and that the requirements, the state requirements for graduation cannot be waived by IEP teams. But they can be expanded on, or they can be determined, the IEP team can determine how those graduation requirements will be met. And then there can be additional requirements for certain students, and that's where the 4+ services would come in, is that they would be additional requirements for students. The important thing too is that if the IEP team determines that a student needs additional services in order to be prepared to graduate, then it is the responsibility of the IEP team to continue to monitor those services, because if the student doesn't receive those services or doesn't complete those services, it falls back on the IEP team to determine then what do you do about that. So we'll need to walk through some of those scenarios as they come up, but and the dialogue with the families, I think, is going to be critical, so everyone understands what is involved with 4+ services. So any questions or comments about it? Brad, anything else?
No, I think that's a good overview, and I think you brought up a good point that that parents need to be involved in this. It needs to occur sooner than April of their senior year. Although it can be, there will be times that'll be brought up, but it just, like I said, every situation I've been involved in has been unique. It's never been, they're really all unique. So that's why, given the fact that they're not the norm, it's important to involve the entire IEP team and keep in the loop. And it is one of those things where if they do go off to a community college, it can be real easy, and I'm not, it's real easy just to not pay attention to the kid during that year or time span they're at that program. But you need to make sure the progress monitoring is done and the IEP is being implemented with integrity, because it will come back to the district to review at some point, and they're going to be responsible for showing that there was data taken and progress was met or not met, and determinations made on where you head from there.
Okay, thanks, Rod.
Yeah.
Okay, now we were talking about 4+ services, so for students that are probably 18, 19, 20 years old. Now we're going to shift to preschool services. for students that are 3, 4, and 5 years of age. So what I'd like to do to start with is have Heather pull up, Heather, the document that looks like this. It's in that link that I sent you this morning. It's, no, the document. And it's the 3rd page in.
Oh.
Yeah, and it might be hard to read, but what I'd like you to do is just take a look at these charts. For 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, all the districts, it's indicator B, A, and indicator B6A and indicator B6B. It's the least restrictive environment indicator for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. So I'd like you to look at this chart and just take a look at it, and I'd be interested in your comments when you look at it. And this is according to AEA. So the first one up here is the indicator B6A. And the first one is for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And indicator B6A is the percentage of children those ages that need special education instructional services. And they receive this majority of their services in a general education environment. The chart on the, well, it's to my right, it may be to your left. There's one that includes 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, and there's one that includes just 3 and 4-year-olds. And if you look at AEA 7, you'll see our percentage, and the target is 42% of 3, 4, and 5-year-olds that would receive special education services primarily in a general education setting. And we have, for last year, for 15-16, we had 30.42% of our kids that received special education services that were in gen ed settings. For 3 and 4-year-olds, it was 31.92% of the kids. And then the charts on the bottom, B6B is the percentage of students 3, 4, and 5 years of age who receive special education services in special schools or residential settings. And so they're the most restrictive placements. And as you can see, the target is 7%. And we have made progress. We've gone from 15.94% down to 10.5%. For 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. For 3 and 4-year-olds, we're at 15.15%, and the target is 7%. The state is at 8.65%. So just have a brief discussion with someone that you're sitting with about what do you think is going on with our AEA? Because as you look across, we tend to be high in more restrictive placements and lower in students receiving their special education services in gen ed settings. So just spend a few minutes, and if you're just by yourself, you can just think to yourself, what do you think is going on? Why don't we pull back and then just share some of the thoughts that you had about what's happening. What do you think is happening, and what are some of the things that we can do to support it? So, Larry, you want to share with some of the ideas that you had?
Beyond blaming it on Greg, who was helping doing it. Part of it's 3-year-old settings. We're not in control of what that general ed setting is, since there's not required 3-year-old settings. Finding daycares or learning centers that are an AC or QPPS certified is difficult, so it's hard to put someone in for instructional services in the non-instructional setting. The needs that are identified are usually pretty significant. Your typical reading, writing, needs that are identified later in the educational environment. So the needs that they have are pretty significant. So if we can find more gen ed settings at the 3-year-old level. Next year, our Head Start's going to a full day setting for their students. We've been partnering with them for AM, PM classes. I don't know how, we're still in the process of figuring out how we're going to partner with them next year. And I know the special ed advisory panel each year, I know that's one of our goals, and that's the things I continue to make sure that the voice as he set that target, the difficulties we have that we don't have as much when you get to the kindergarten range.
Other comments from the remote site? Any insights or comments that you might have about the data and what's happening at the 3, 4, 5 level? It sounds like Larry summed it up pretty well. Well, this is what our current reality is for AEA 267, is this data. And we do want to work with you to support finding general education environments that are appropriate for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds that need specially designed instruction. Each one of your districts also are responsible for this indicator, and you will have that data in your district profiles. And we pulled up some of that data, and it varies greatly. And again, I think it will reflect what resources are available in your community. What I do want you to be aware of is the document, and I did attach this one document, and then also I attached the setting codes. It explains how it's determined, whether it's considered a gen ed environment or not. Then the other document that I have attached to the agenda is the Dear Colleague letter from the Office of Special Education Programs. And Heather, you want to pull that one up? Yeah. This one I just want to go through with you to point out some things about the guidance that has been provided. And this is very current guidance. It's January 9th, 2017. There was a previous Dear Colleague letter pertaining to preschool LRE issues in 2012, and this takes precedent now over that Dear Colleague letter. So this is the most current, and this has the ruling or the information that you need in order to proceed as far as LRE for early childhood. On the one of the things this letter points out is the LRE requirements for early childhood students are exactly the same as they are for 6 to 21-year-olds. And it's been in the law ever since the original law was passed in 1975. So on the third page, under key statutory and regulatory requirements, again, it's just like for a 3rd grader or a 5th grader. When you're determining an educational placement, you have to obviously include all the appropriate people in the decision in the IEP team. You need to make a decision about the services considering the least restrictive environment. And you have to determine it annually, just like for every other child. And you need to explain if child cannot be educated in the general education environment, just like you do with any other child with a disability. So the default is the general education environment with supplemental supports and aids to support that student. That's the first setting that you would consider. If that is not appropriate, then you can move to a more restrictive environment, just like you would with any other child. So this applies to 3, 4, and 5-year-olds as well as for 6 to 21-year-olds. And the public agency, so it would be you as the public school, you do need to provide a full continuum of services for students 3, 4, and 5 years of age, just like you do for 6 to 21-year-olds. And this document goes into different options that are available. And Larry referenced some of the options. There, you know, fortunately, in most of the states and in Iowa, we do have the voluntary 4-year-old preschool programs now that are operated by the districts. I think there's only 10 districts or 8 or 10 districts that do not have the voluntary preschool program. There are Head Start programs, community-based programs. The challenge is the 3-year-old programs, finding services for children who are 3 years of age. And that is where we'll need to focus our attention on that, and also expanding the opportunities for 4-year-olds in gen ed settings. I do know that we need to really work closely with you, because the AEA staff primarily work with students who are birth to 3 when they are receiving early access services, and as they transition to preschool services, if they're entitled to and eligible for specially designed instruction, we'll need to work closely with the district about finding services that would be in the least restrictive environment. So this is an area that we're really going to focus on and support you in making those options available for preschool students. One of the things I do want to point out, and I can't remember what page it's on. Oh, okay, it's on the, let me see how to keep going. It's on that page. One of the things that happens is when a child is receiving, and this, I'm pointing this out because it also applies to students who are 6 years of age and older, that students may be placed in a general education environment and they're receiving instruction in that general education environment. Then they're pulled out either in the back of the room or in another location in the building to receive services, whether it's support services or instructional services. And that is no longer considered in the general education environment. So that is clear in here. And so we also are going to be working with our support staff that as they provide services, that it could be integrated into the routine of the preschool classroom. Because when we pull students out and provide one-on-one support or even a small group support with students just with disabilities, it's considered a restricted placement. It's no longer a general education environment. So, and that is also true if a student is in a 3rd grade classroom and the special education teacher comes in and works with the group of students in the back of the room on specially designed instruction, that no longer is being integrated into the curriculum in the general education environment. So I would encourage you to review this document. This is the latest document on least restrictive environment for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. We will share this and be working with our AEA staff so that they can support you in making decisions about 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds as far as least restrictive options for them when they need specially designed instruction. And we are also, I will work in order to take a look at the indicator B6A and B6B for each district. And that may be part of a dialogue that our regional administrators would have with you as administrative teams to see how we can support you in working toward including more 3, 4, and 5-year-olds into least restrictive environments. So are there any comments or questions about that data? We are, the AEA 267, as you can tell from the information that was shared and on the links, we're probably one of the lowest AEAs as far as including students 3, 4, and 5-year-olds in gen ed settings. So it will be a high priority for us to support you in finding gen ed settings for students. So any comments or questions about that? Okay, thank you. We'll move on then to seclusion rooms. Rod is going to share some information.
Yeah, if you'll hit on that link, seclusion rules all are based around 103B, seclusion and restraint procedure and protocol that came out, it's probably been 10 years now. It hasn't changed. Get a lot of questions about seclusion rooms and what is a seclusion room and how big should it be, and you know, they don't give a lot of guidance on seclusion rooms, but the key factors when thinking about a seclusion room, what is a seclusion room? And I'll go through various parts of this. I'm not going to go through the whole 103 law. A seclusion room is where a student is put into a room and not allowed access out. So you're either, you're block, somebody's standing in the doorway, they've been told they can't leave that room. That's the disciplinary protocol. When they, in 103B, the guidance they give on seclusion rooms is it needs to be appropriately sized for the age of the student. I'll be upfront and honest, probably a 2x2 closet, not a good idea for either elementary, high school, or anybody. So, as I think about a seclusion room, I think about it needs to be big enough that the kid can lay down. Okay, that doesn't mean you want them laying down, but it provides that kind of space. So it has to be appropriate space for the age of the child. It has to be well ventilated, and the child has to be provided access to the bathroom. That's what needs to be required for a seclusion room. If you are going to use a power lock on the door of a seclusion room, the ones you use are the plunger type locks that need to be held down, and somebody needs to be there monitoring that. You just can't, and I think we've known this for a long time, you can't lock the kid in the room. And for safety reasons, your best choice is if you need a lock type system on the door, and I'm not saying that isn't needed from time to time, use the power plunger type lock system. Instead of not using a lock at all, you don't want to hold the door. You don't want to sit there holding the door because that can lead to so. But the big thing with seclusion rooms is appropriate space for the size of the student, well ventilated, and access to bathrooms if needed. 103B is one of these laws. It does need to be reviewed with employees yearly if you read the law. We do have it on our website. We have a presentation in regards to that reviews 103B and all the concepts of 103B. And it's important to review that with your staff. And it defines what physical confinement in detention or seclusion is. It's involuntary confinement of a person in a room or area from which the person is physically prevented from leaving. Physical restraint is any manual method that restricts freedom of movement of the person's arms, legs, or head. If periodic training, an important point, it is now required for educators to equip themselves with the tools they need to do seclusion and restraint. The law really, this whole 103B does incorporate positive behavior interventions in sports. But the key here, I think, is if you've got staff that are going to be needing to do restraint and de-escalation, provide CPI or MANT training. Some districts, the AEA, we have CPI trainers. Districts have CPI trainers, and make sure they're trained appropriately for those if they're going to be doing, make sure staff who are going to be dealing with restraint and de-escalation are trained. It doesn't require that everybody in the building be trained, but those people who are going to be exposed, are going to be working with students where that is a possibility, they need to be trained. And I always make the recommendation that it's not a bad idea for a building to have a response team where everybody's trained anyway. We often think of restraint and de-escalation as being a special ed issue. It's not. You could have an incident with non-special ed kids where that could be needed. And so that's just a wise thing to do also. Prone restraint is prohibited. That's, on your stomach just because of the dangers of a prone restraint. Reasonable force is part of the law. I'll let you guys read through, but remember, at school staff can, protect themselves, they can protect others, and they can protect property. If seclusion and restraint is used, there needs to be a documentation processed, and you have to notify parents on the day of the instance. If a seclusion goes beyond 60 minutes, that needs to be evaluated by an administrator if it's going to continue beyond that time. That's something that can easily be neglected. Remember that seclusion in a seclusion room is when kids aren't allowed to leave the seclusion area. They're being held there. Seclusion is not if you have in a behavior plan that if the kid feels anxiety or is becoming stressed to the point where they may lose control, they can voluntarily put themselves in an area until they maintain control. That's not seclusion from the aspect that you're giving them the ability to empower themselves to go to an area, and they're not being held there. There's going to be rules that they can leave, and they can also access facilities. So, but anytime that they're being put into a room and not allowed to leave, that would be seclusion. And then, as part of this, it's important that, a lot of times staff ask, well, you can't use corporal punishment. We know that. Well, what is not corporal punishment? In Iowa's view, corporal punishment is not verbal chastisement, which I still think is not appropriate. So, but it's not corporal punishment. Any request for physical activity or extracurricular athletics, my children themselves would tell me that running the mile twice a year is corporal punishment, but it's not. Detentions within reasonable time limits is not corporal punishment. Actions consistent with IEPs, so long as the IEP does not violate Chapter 103. So that would be your behavior plans and things like that. But you have to take, you have to follow 103B. You can't put into a behavior plan that when the kid becomes agitated, they're going to be put into seclusion for 2 hours. Obviously, you've got to follow 103B that follow the 60-minute guidelines. And then it gets into what is necessary and reasonable force. I'll let you guys read that on your own. But I know we always get a lot of questions about that. And then they always give the advice that use positive behavior supports if needed. But I think the key to any school building that has to do some crisis intervention is make sure staff are aware of 103B guidelines, and those staff that are in situations where they may need to de-escalate and restrain, they need to have CPI and appropriate training as needed. And I'm going to open it up to any questions if there are any.
Rod, do you have any examples of districts that you've seen that have been really good examples of meeting code, like ideal setups when it comes to these types of?
You know, River Hills has got a couple pretty good rooms. You know, Bremwood's got a pretty good setup, and those are ones that I'm aware of. In districts, I think when Dyke New Hartford left, I think they had called me once about using them. The biggest problem I've seen, Justin, is quite often they just leave the kids unattended in these situations, or not. You know, as I view it, anytime intervention should be part of the BIP. You know, you write it into the BIP, and there needs to be an instructional component to it, because you need to effectively help the kid. And you know this through your Bremwood experience, and so does Greg, and Larry's been involved in many of this too, is that you want the kids to be able to manage themselves in an intervention or seclusion situation where they can work themselves out of that appropriately. So, but from the end of I think River Hills is what I'm familiar with. They've got an intervention room there, and I think that one there is kind of the perfect size for whether you're elementary or high school. So I think it's worth looking at. I was going to call Mike Lonnie and get the measurements on that, and I didn't. I forgot. But I think it's something like 8 by 6. So you may need to pad a room, given the needs of the kid, if they're a head butter or something like that, and that even involves padding the floor. How do you do that? There's a wrestling mat company in Waterloo that we've ordered mats from that we've used to put on the walls and stuff, and that's important. If the kid is a self-abuser, that gets kind of scary. I hate to talk about that, but you do want to be able to protect the child in those instances, because quite often it's not appropriate to intervene and restrain in those instances either, because you can do more harm than good. So.
Amy mentioned in the chat that Eppington Parkersburg has one in each elementary building.
Okay. Amy. May. And those would be worth looking at. I didn't know AP had those. So. All right. Thank you.
Okay. We're going to go through some quick agenda items. I want to give you an update on the Iowa tier. And first, I'd like to hear from you. Are you aware of any difficulty that you had during the winter testing with the Iowa tier and the FAST assessment? I see heads shaking no. Any concerns with the winter testing on the remote side? Okay, because this, as of last week, this was the report from the Department of Ed, that the total users by day in the tier, you want to pull up that PowerPoint, was record-breaking this winter, during the winter testing period. And if you recall, there was concern during the fall testing period because the system could not handle the large number of users. So there were the largest number of users during the winter period. So it was 16,126 users was the highest single day ever in tier, and the tier system was able to accommodate it. Okay, and then the next slide is the next one. Go back. This is the assessment administered by day. And again, the winter 2017 had the highest single day where assessments were administered, 26,164, and the system was able to accommodate it. The next slide indicates that the system had improved greatly, that the users indicated these were some of the comments, and there were no system outages or downtime. It loaded faster for users and it was working reliably. The districts continue to want to increase the tier usage, and this slide just talks about how many sites were added this year. And there are approximately about 280,000 students, pre-K 6, that are on the system right now. There are more users, more kids, more tests, more tickets, and the system is still working nicely this winter. So, the bottom line from the Department of Ed is that the technical audit for the tier system is being completed this month. That depending on the technical audit results, it looks like new development will start up again probably in March, at least sometime this spring. How this relates to special education is the IEP and the IFSP were in the process of being developed. They continue to work on developing the IFSP and IEP to integrate it into the tier system. So it's still on target to implement July 1st, 2018. The critical factor was whether or not the system was going to be able to handle the capacity, have the capacity to handle it. And so with respect to the IFSP and IEP, it will move forward with it and project to implement it July 1st, 2018. So that was the most recent projection date. So that has not been delayed by the delay in the last few months with the tier system. So any questions or comments about that? It's a big sigh of relief that it has the capacity to handle what we want the system to do. We'll keep you updated on the Iowa tier system. Okay, just want to give you an update on extended school year services, and Rod was at the meeting where this was discussed. So
Yeah.
I'll turn it over to Rod.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, when I was in Des Moines 2 weeks ago, it was brought up, and this is something that I've been involved in the past too. With extended school year, a question came up, can you use a non-special ed person to teach extended school year? Is that appropriate? And the question is kind of a yes/no kind of question. A licensed special ed teacher has to monitor instruction for extended school year. And that's important. Extended school year is an IEP team decision. There's a goal area of concern that's carried on through the school year. So, from the school year into the extended school year setting. So obviously where we're heading now is if you're going to have extended school year programs, you need to have a special ed person monitor the goal areas of concern that's being serviced during that extended school year period. So to give you an example of I realize that can pose somewhat of a challenge, because quite often the teacher who served the child during the school year that does not want to be the one providing the extended school year service. And I'll use the River Hills facility as an example. We do employ two consultants who have severe, profound, moderate endorsement during the summer. So now they will become, as part of their role during the summer, kind of lead teachers. And for staff that we have that don't have that special ed endorsement, they will be the ones monitoring instruction in those classrooms and monitoring those goals if the kids, are there for extended school year services. So, but that's something that districts going to have to think about, I think, as this rolls out sooner. Keep that in mind and be in contact with your RA, and we can help give more guidance in regards to that, your regional administrators. But I think that is a biggie. That's something that has, across the state, it was brought up with the whole group of AEA directors, because it is something that across the state, it's not unusual that districts have employed teachers during the summer that don't have special ed endorsements to provide that extended school year service, and we have to think about that differently now.
Is that an issue? Will that be an issue? Some people are, yeah.
Yeah, at least in Waterloo, we have quite a few special ed teachers providing service. We also have some general teachers that provide it as well. So can they provide instruction under the guidance of special ed teachers to help design and monitor?
Yeah, help design and monitor. Yep.
If Thomas Mays is going to provide some guidance in the near future with respect to this extended school year, but a collaborative model can be used. It just needs to have a licensed special ed teacher that is monitoring the instruction, appropriately licensed special ed teacher. Any comments or questions from the remote side? Okay. Well, we are moving through the agenda items quickly, so we are going to.
One quick question, Mary.
Oh, yes.
Does the special ed teacher have to do the progress monitoring on the IEP?
That can be done in collaboration. In other words, my answer would be the gen ed teacher, the teacher that maybe be employed to be in that room full time, can do the progress monitoring, but it does have to be monitored in collaboration with the special ed teacher and evaluated.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions or comments? We have two more agenda items, and then I was just going to make some announcements. So why don't we just proceed and rather than take a break, because we can adjourn early then. I did want to just touch on Medicaid, and many of your districts bill for Medicaid, and we're developing some guidance at the state level for the AEAs to be consistent in billing for Medicaid. And there are some times when our occupational therapists and physical therapists may be providing services when there are paras involved with the student and present when the district is billing for the paras, that we need to make an agreement. We need to have an agreement with each of the districts about how we're going to bill for those services. There are times when it's permissible for the AEA to bill for the OT services, even if the district is billing for the para services. And then there are other times when we have to agree either that the AEA won't bill or make some kind of agreement. And the directors of special ed are working with Jim Donahue in order to develop a guidance document that we will share with you so that we have that on record, an agreement with each district about how we're going to do that. Heather, do you have any, since you're involved with Medicaid, do you have any other comment about Medicaid?
I don't think so. Rod, do you have anything on Medicaid?
No. It's just a matter now that we need to have an agreement about how we're going to bill under those circumstances. Then the last thing on the agenda, I wanted to just draw to your attention. There is a Supreme Court case that was heard. The oral arguments were in January in front of the Supreme Court. And I did attach it. It's 74 pages long, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing, the whole oral arguments. But I will just let you know that it could have implications for all of us. This is testing the Raleigh standard. And I know many of you remember this. It was in 1982 that Amy Raleigh, the Board of Education versus Amy Raleigh, established the Raleigh standard, which means that a free appropriate education means that the district, the public agency, is responsible for providing an appropriate service, appropriate education. It's not the most appropriate, it's not, and that's where the analogy developed as far as it's not a Cadillac version of an educational program. I know that that's in the literature, but but the Raleigh standard is that the services need to be appropriate, and it needs to afford the student a reasonably calculated benefit from the educational program. The Supreme Court case that is being heard, that has been heard, and that's being reviewed by the Supreme Court would raise that standard, that it would make it a different standard. So it could have some implications for public school districts. And it was heard in January, and it, I'm not sure when it's going to be decided upon. It may be decided sometime this spring, but I'll keep you informed as I hear about it. But it is being talked about as could be very significant. It's been, 35 years since the Raleigh standard was established, and so this may be challenged. It is being challenged right now. So, any questions about that or comments? Okay, just a couple other things I want to share with you. We mentioned in December when we met about our mental health support team. And we have 11 team members that are part of the mental health support team. Not necessarily the 4 from the team, but we are going to have 4 staff members that are trained in mental health first aid. And part of the responsibility then will be for those 4 staff members to come back and provide training to educators in our local school districts and for the AEA staff. So we will be providing some mental health first aid for your teachers. The training for our staff will be in April, so it will be probably sometime next fall that the training will be available, and we'll make sure that you're notified about that so you can have staff participate as you see appropriate. We really want to move forward and support you in meeting the needs and helping address the needs of students with mental health concerns. So that was one thing. The other thing I wanted to share with you is the weighted matrix. You know that the weighted matrix was revised and was implemented starting in 2015, 2016, but fully implemented this year for the count. And just wanted to share with you some of the child count data for the state. And the count was, the total number of students was up this year that were needed specially designed instruction, so that were included in the weighted count, which was different than the trend had been going down as far as total number. But this year, I think statewide, we had 702 more students that were weighted than in the previous years. And also the pattern is that there are more level 3. There are more students that have been weighted level 3. And ever since as a state we implemented the consistent weighted matrix, we have had a decrease in students at level 1 and an increase in level 2 and an increase in level 3. And it may be a reflection of the complexity of the students that we're dealing with now. With respect to the change, the revision in the weighted matrix, that may also be because of some of the feedback we received from all of you, that we needed to revise it a little bit to reflect some of the expenses the district incur when they're providing services for students that have challenging needs. And so that was incorporated into the revised weighted matrix. So that may attribute to some of the increases for students that are rated level 3. So that is basically the announcements that we had, Any comments or questions about any of the information that we shared today? I do want to just make one personal announcement. Some of you already know this, but I have decided to retire as of December 2017. And so Sam is in the process right now of interviewing people to replace me. And the plan is that the new person would start July 1st and that I'd work with the new person for 6 months until I retire in December 2017. So it will be a new chapter in my life. And in addition to that, I became a grandmother for the first time. So not only am I planning for retirement, but I can plan to enjoy it with my granddaughters. So anyway, it's been great working with everybody, and I'll still have 10 more months to work with you. But just to let you know, in case you hadn't heard that, that is in the plans, and there will probably be an announcement sometime in March about the new executive director for special education. That will start in July. So with that, if there are any questions or comments?
Very much just said congrats and thanks for all the guidance.
Oh, thank you.
And also ideas for the next meeting.
Oh, yes. Before you leave, we'd like some ideas for the next meeting. Are there some topics, agenda items that you would like us to address for the next meeting? You can let us know today, or you can email me and let me know, or email Heather and let us know, and we'll include them on the agenda. The next meeting is April 12th here in this room or by Zoom.
I've received a little bit, and I know this might be exclusive to Region 7, but this idea of the TA and ED code being used in IEPs and how the weighted matrix can impact that meaning on numbers 3 and 4 in the weighted matrix, whether or not you're adding 1 or 2 at each of those levels, and if that impacts or is based upon what code you might enter in. I think some discussion around that could be helpful.
Okay. Well, that also would lend itself to the agreement we need to have if we're billing for Medicaid, because those are the 2 codes that are impacted.
Yeah, and even I would even expand that into health services, and with regard to health plans and how school nurses may be a part of when they need to be a part of that IEP team, and that we need to make sure that we're inviting them because some of those health services could equate to Medicaid billable services. I'm not sure that we're capturing all those when we could.
Okay.
We've got 2 from the chat. One is SDI changes.
Okay.
Another is how to serve students who have 60 minutes of SDI in areas as in addition to or 4 plus more.
Okay. Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Enjoy the beautiful weather. Thanks for coming and participating.
Did you want those questions answered from Major?
Yeah, Brad answered it.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Okay.